Dziękujemy, Rafał. Dla mnie była to bardzo ciekawa prezentacja.
To me, it was a very interesting presentation, absolutely different than the previous. It's also a dimension of what we are talking about. And it was proof how this basic education, well, because most often these are simple things, really, how much it's needed. It is exactly shown us. How people treat, how people their impact on the entire environment and on the animals, obviously. I have a question now on this artificial coloring. Is it a very popular procedure? Is it legal to color fish by injections? In Poland, we have a law on protection of animals, and it is not allowed to modify animals. And any kind of intervention in other purposes than saving the animals is prohibited. So we have the law, but the problem is that our institutions have a lot of there are a lot of legal gaps, which is why my initiative is kind of leveling up the field. So hundreds of thousands of snails now is not sent to Poland and is not sent to Spain. Maybe it's better. So it's difficult to the vets to even recognize that something is artificially colored. They do not know it. They know nothing about fish. And this issue is very dramatic across the European Union. It's a serious problem. Well, for example, I import aquarium fish and shrimps from Taiwan or Thailand. And I know that if I import aquarium fish, I need to have a special health certificate, EU health certificate, signed by a third country vet. And they don't recognize these papers. So, well, they draw these documents because they have to, with information that the animal is free from diseases, but they don't really notice, they don't care. And the legal gap is there because the certificate calls the aquarium fish decoration fish, decoration animals, which means that they have no contact with the environment, so it's not subject to the vet control. Which means that you may buy sick fish in aquarium in shops. Nobody's really interested because the only control ever is the control on border, which is based on the document issued by the third country vet. So the control is really non-existent. And one example is when I import shrimp, then the European vet, I may write shrimp on the box, and they give me a code that this is fish. I don't know whether they look inside the boxes. Maybe they don't even care. And they say, okay, that's fish, but it's not a control. So once again, the control is non-existing, which is why you may buy invasive species and genetically colored, deformed. So the shops are not controlled, which is one of the issues I want to tackle. So the education there should stay with the educated customer. The customers should be aware and they should not buy it. My campaign is going for a year. And last year, I managed to convince the majority of the aquarium shops to adopt new standards on animal welfare. So I convinced them to quit the legally banned species. They were not afraid, they were not aware of it. They were simply buying, and they thought it was legal. Well, and if something went through the border with all the paperwork, then it should be okay. So it's an entire chain of lack of education and knowledge. So I see new companies joining this campaign, and now even these shops who have confirmed the standards, they don't want to sell too small glass bowls for fish. And I wanted to cover other species which would be invasive. So briefly speaking, the decisions have been made, and it's not because of vet controls, because it's non-existing once again, but the owners of portals, they are aware, and they want everything to be correct. They don't want to take part in trading illegal species. So it's our huge educational campaign. If someone wants to buy a legally prohibited animal on the internet, they will receive a feedback that it's this species and what they can do with it, like to a shelter. So that's how it's going to work. The educational campaign, yes, and now over 90% of genetically modified fish have been taken away from the market. Well, you have great results. It took me 3 months, really. So these mussels, which we have in Oder and Vistula River, last year we've withdrawn 80,000, and they breed androgenetically, so they multiply really easily. The invasion was blocked. I have several questions on chat. Marta, you may ask your question now. Marta? You've said about birds which would catch the marbled crayfish. I'm wondering, what birds did you convince to catch the crayfish, and how did you do it? I'm looking for the name of it. These are two species. In water, when we have ponds and lakes, then it's Whiska, a duck, and Whiska likes these crayfish. I did not really need to convince them, but in the forests, it was a different story. There is nobody there who would like crayfish. And the first bird who got interested, well, it was a crow family, and it was Suika. So I noticed they were looking down there. So it was a jay in the forest. And I was digging and I was not covering it by my body. And I saw that Jay was interested. And after several times, we got back, and there were a lot of jays penetrating the ground where we were digging, but they were interested in others, and they got it really immediately. But they didn't have any activity before, so it must have been a week we've done it. Other questions to Rafał? Any small comment on that? Whether we should favor breeding of alien species, but I have one I have 3 questions, really. I hope you can hear me. What happens to crayfish you catch? Do you eat them? Well, we have a lot of ideas how to use them. We use them in our research, but also we use them for monitoring pollution with microplastics and heavy metals, which is great because you can collect muscle, compare them. And this paper will be published really soon. And also support the animal habitats or in the zoos. We have a lot of alien species in Polish waters. We may feed cat shelters with them, and there will be a lot spare. It's something that we can catch. And if we take care so that the environment is not much modified, then it will be more difficult to be penetrated by alien species. So preserving natural stages of ecosystem will help to prevent it from.
Że to jest nasz albo nie nasz.
Because Polish crayfish is protected. So you have to be able to tell the difference. Like strike them over their nose to feel the teeth. My parents have a pond and they have thousands of that mussels. How can I fight them? I stocked this pond with trout and they did well, but then otters came and the trout are gone. And that little fish is there. I think the easiest way is to catch it. You can use a towel or a net. This is your own pond, right? So you can use nets or you can use traps. You can buy a net for 20 zlotys. What's important is not to move it from pond to pond and don't carry the fish that you catch with it between ponds, because that's how the pathogen spreads. Well, the pond has spring water, which then overflows into a river. So that's one of the reasons why I'm asking, because I want to stop the spread of that. I'm going to write down the name of the pathogen for you on the chat. So what you don't want is the zombie, right? And this is what they do to your native fish. So just use a net and do it regularly and it will go away. This is the only method, unless you have a predator. Right, thank you. And I think there was one more question there on the chat. There was a comment and then Grzegorz was there. I don't think this is the right question for me though. Do you mean a closed or an open farm? If it's an open farm, then I don't think the protection is good enough. And so we have these carp ponds, and that has led to the spread of different invasive species. Well, carp itself But if we want to have alien species, they should be kept in closed areas. And if it's an aquarium, then you have to make sure that there is some supervision over this. Otherwise, we see loads of fish dying. Here's a question from Evelina. If we come across an invasive species, what should we do? And so we have a differentiation here. An invasive species can be both an alien or native. If it's a native, then you don't do anything unless you have a permit. But when it comes to alien invasive species, then obviously you don't reintroduce them. So if you're an angler, and they come across such species most often, so if they catch the species, then they are required to identify invasive species, and they are not allowed to reintroduce them into the water. But the problem is they just drop them in the bushes without killing them humanely, and so they die and suffer as they die. So that's pointless. And people see this and they don't think well of anglers that they are not killing, right? So this is abuse of animals, and it's not obviously the animal's fault that they are an invasive species, but these things happen. So one thing is you are not allowed to reintroduce them. Now, in terms of, for example, catching them in big numbers, like the clams. If 3 2-liter bottles were easily filled with the mussels by scout boys, and they brought it to me as food for my turtle. Yes, and that's what you can do, because this could be good food for other animals, like for turtles, and it's even helpful. And as a result, shelters can reduce their costs and use the money they have for food for additional, catches of invasive species or for transport, whatever. And now the final question: what is the legal basis for you to stimulate artificial spawning in aquarium fish? I don't stimulate anything. I don't understand the question. Can you be more precise with this question? Under Polish conditions, we don't color fish at all. This is fish imported from Asia. We don't do that. So any colored fish is imported. But we also have some fish farms for genetically modified fish, but that's illegal, but that's a different story. So that the stimulation you are writing about, Krzysztof, does not exist. Right, thank you very much for all the questions to everyone, and thank you to Rafał.